Remember my very first slide when I told you about the virtual town, and that when managers got back to their workplace, the biggest issue they had, didn't have time to do anything else on social media. So actually, workload and too many competing priorities is the number one reason given for not using social media. The second is a lack of understanding and buy-in from upper management. Typically, social media enters organisations from the bottom up. Concerns from the IT department. And this is largely around support, but mostly security risks. As I was just saying, that social media enters organisations from the bottom up, typically through marketing, through communications. And from there it grows organically. Now, what my research is showing is that social media, as it comes to the organisation, and it's allowed to grow slowly, it's allowed to grow organically, it actually gets hold of the organisation and it will start to get wider and wider used. Organisations that try to take a traditional approach to IT and say we're going to put this across everyone collapses. Speaking to some of your social media people today, Walsall Council, for example, used Yammer very effectively, and it grew organically. I'm speaking with Victoria University in Wellington. It started to, they introduced it to a small group. It was growing, and somebody decided we'll put it right across the organisation. 6 weeks later, no one's using it. I'm not going to cover these in any detail at the moment. We're going to have time after the presentation where we continue that discussion. The key point I want to make here is that as social media enters the organisation and starts to grow organically at various places in that organisation, there comes a time when senior managers need to put a strategy and a framework around that use of social media. There's an academic in Japan called Monarchia, and he recognised the importance of, if you like, social media, of accessing knowledge across the organisation and getting people with different thinking and different backgrounds to work together. There'll be some people in this room of my generation who remember Datsun cars and some of the Datsun car jokes. Why is that? What do you call a Datsun with a sunroof? Skip. Why is a Datsun got a, why do Datsuns have rear heated windows? Keep your hands warm when you're pushing them. Monarchia recognised that to get innovative change, you needed access to diversity. You needed to allow people to network, and that's exactly what he did in a very manual way. He mixed up the design teams, and it revolutionised car design in Japan. It revolutionised the Japanese car industry, and how many of us today drive Japanese cars. Key point here is there's nothing new about social media or the practices it can support. The point here is you now have new tools that can enable that broad networking, that broad collaboration that gives you access to the diversity to drive innovative change. And the web officer, Simon Gray, makes a good point. It's not just about connecting people digitally, it's about getting people physically working together. And there's some work being done at Lancaster University with communities of how you can use social technologies to introduce people to what's important is how do you actually get them meeting, how do you actually get them working together. Enterprise 2, I'll go through this quite quickly. The first response by most organisations to the public's use of web is to imitate it. So why do organisations use Facebook, Twitter and YouTube? Because that's what the public are using. So in the first instance, these are the technologies that organisations tend to use. say there's good and bad practice, and after the presentation I can give some examples of that. And as I'm echoed by your own web officer, social media is much more than just Facebook and Twitter. As I was saying, the practices and conventions around social media were not designed in organisations. Organisations responding to it. So when you're starting using social media, there's essentially a four-step process. There's to listen, to monitor, and to understand what the customer is saying. It is to participate in their conversations as a partner in a conversation and not just pushing information out. It's to collaborate with customers to design and deliver products and services, and ultimately, remember the maturity model is to empower customers to support other customers. I'll go through this in a little bit more detail. You've got it in your notes and you can read it, and again I'm not aware of time. But the key point here is in social media, the first thing you start doing is listening. And a lot of the social media tools have tools to actually listen to what people are saying and monitor what they're saying. A marketing company once said to me, they said in a presentation, that when you engage in conversation with your customers, it's rather like having a conversation in the pub. You don't go down the pub and say, this is what I'm selling, or this is what I'm providing. It's actually engaging in that listening and talking process. Collaborate with customers to design and deliver products and services. So, for example, Coca-Cola, most of their marketing campaigns are developed by their customers. Starbucks does the same. BT Databasegate, they actually listen to what their customers are saying on blogs, on Twitter, and in forums, and they use social media to answer those questions directly. Best Buy's 12th Force, I've already mentioned, of how anyone in the organisation can reply to a customer's question. And it's predicted that customers are predicted to become a key contributor to R&D in the future. So you're starting to think about the products and the services you're providing to Birmingham City. The people in the city are going to be increasingly involved in determining what those services are. And this is where we ultimately want to get to, is that through social media you provide the platform where customers can assist customers. I've already mentioned how Microsoft uses the super users. Lancaster City Council are looking at how they can replace services that have been completely cut by providing a support network or social media network so that customers can support customers. So one of the key things about social media is networking. It networks people, information, knowledge, services, activities, and technology. When we talk about information, that's explicit. That's the stuff that's stored in documents. But what's more important is the knowledge. Is how do you access stuff in people's head? From a knowledge management perspective, what people have normally done is they've tried to map out an organisation and work where the knowledge sits. And how do you make the connections? This has some validity in that it's still a process that can be applied to start thinking about which services you need to connect across the organisation, and then what social media tools you'd actually use to support that collaboration. There's a number of different ways you can actually create the networks. There's the customised response that IBM's JAM project did. IBM are notoriously not very